The banquet hall shimmered under warm yellow lights, laughter echoing from every round table draped in pristine white linen. I stood quietly in a corner, watching it all, people dressed in formal attire, raising glasses to toast Mr. Henry's retirement after 42 years of relentless service. None of them looked at me for too long, and I didn't expect them to. I wasn't officially invited. The invitation reached me through Lily, Mr. Henry's granddaughter, the only one in the family who had ever offered me a genuine smile since Mark passed. She had slipped it into my hand during a charity fair, whispering, "You should come. He'd be happy." But now, standing among those wearing the invisible badge of true family, I felt like a misplaced shadow. Mrs. Patricia, Mr. Henry's second wife, was overseeing the gift-giving. On the main table, presents were handed out: an engraved watch, commemorative photo frames, even a walnut walking cane for the eldest grandson. Everyone was beaming for pictures, laughing loudly, calling each other to the stage. I stepped back, trying to hide the wave of emotion rising in the corners of my eyes. As the pile of gifts dwindled, I told myself, "Don't expect anything, Eliza. You're not family anymore. You're no longer Mark's wife. He's gone. And the ties that once connected you to this family have been quietly, mercilessly severed." "And finally," Patricia said, her eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on me, "a small token for Ms. Eliza." I froze. Every eye turned to me, including Mr. Henry, sitting quietly to the right of the stage. Patricia approached and placed a small silver tray in my hands. On it sat a non-alcoholic wine glass and a neatly folded napkin. "You're not family, but you came," she said with a dry smile. "This is so you won't feel completely forgotten." A few soft chuckles rippled from nearby tables. No one laughed too loudly, but just enough for me to feel the subtle mockery woven into their tones. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the silver tray like it was a polished emblem of humiliation. Then I pressed my lips together and turned away. I made my way toward the door. The air felt suffocating. Every step echoed sharply against the backdrop of "What a Wonderful World" playing in the background. A wonderful world unless you were me. Wait. The voice rang through the microphone. Mr. Henry's voice. I stopped. The entire room stopped. He was standing now, microphone in hand, his eyes locked onto mine. No more hesitation. No more silence. Just a father who had something to say and had chosen now to say it. "There's one last thing I've saved for the end," he said, his voice steady despite the tremble of age. "Something no one else in this room knows except for me." The room fell silent. I turned back, still holding the meaningless silver tray. In his eyes I didn't see pity. I saw something unfamiliar. Was it regret? Resolve? I couldn't tell. But I knew I couldn't walk out that door anymore. He gestured for me to come to the stage. Inside me, a storm of emotions began to rise: anger, hurt, suspicion, and most of all, the need to understand. To hear why. To know why he had chosen to speak now. I climbed the steps, my heart pounding. The room watched me. No one breathed heavily. It was just him, me, and the microphone. He placed a hand on my shoulder, his gaze unwavering as he said, "Eliza, my daughter-in-law, though no longer in title, still the one my son loved until his last breath, deserves the final gift today." And from the inside pocket of his coat, he pulled out a small wooden box, handing it to me with both hands. I clutched the wooden box tightly, trying to keep my hands from trembling. It was light, just enough to let you know it held something small but important. The entire room remained silent. Mr. Henry didn't say another word. He simply nodded, signaling for me to open it. Inside was an old, yellowed envelope, sealed with a now cracked red wax stamp. On the front, in handwriting so familiar it made my chest tighten, read, "To Father, if one day I'm no longer here." My heart pounded. I recognized that handwriting instantly. It was Mark's. The room blurred in my vision. I heard someone gasp, maybe Patricia, maybe myself. I couldn't make out the sounds around me anymore. All I could hear was my heartbeat thudding in my temples. I picked up the letter. Mr. Henry's hand gently touched my back, as if to keep me steady. I looked at him and he nodded. "Read it, Eliza." He wrote it to me, but I think you should be the first to read it. I sat down in the empty chair next to him. Inside me, memories flooded back the night's Mark, and I would write Christmas cards by the fireplace. His deep voice laced with gentle sarcasm whenever I misspelled something. He always said I was too sentimental. And he, always the rational one. Yet now this letter had been written with the heart of a man who feared he might never get to say goodbye. I opened the letter. Father, if one day I'm no longer here, if the worst happens, I only ask that you keep this letter and remember what I say today. Eliza is an inseparable part of my life. She's not just my wife. She's my friend, the light in all my darkest days. If I'm not here to say this myself, please treat her as family. She has endured so much from stepmother and relatives. Yet she never once complained. She never spoke ill of anyone. She simply loved quietly and steadfastly. I don't know what the future holds, but I hope one day you'll see in her what I've always seen: her kindness, her strength, and her unrelenting heart. Please keep her in our family as I always have. Mark. I couldn't stop the tears from falling. The entire room was still. Their eyes no longer held pity or indifference. Something had shifted. I didn't need their sympathy. I just wanted them to understand. And maybe now they finally did. Patricia suddenly stood up. I didn't know that letter existed, she stammered, as if trying to untangle a knot in her throat. No one did, Mr. Henry replied, his eyes still on me. I kept it in my drawer for 3 years. I didn't know what to do with it until today. I looked at him, eyes aged, forehead lined with the years. But there was sincerity there. And above all, regret. Why today? I asked quietly. He looked around, then said, because today is the last day I have the authority to decide anything before passing it all on to the next generation. I can't take this old mistake with me to the grave. I could feel the hush that settled over the entire room. Those were honest words, the kind not many men have the courage to speak, especially not in front of a crowd, especially at the twilight of life. Then Mr. Henry turned to face everyone, raising the microphone once more. We've wronged Eliza. Not just me, all of us. For the past 3 years she's visited me every Sunday, brought me my favorite food, cleaned the yard, taken me to the hospital when I was sick. Not a single word of complaint. And I stayed silent for those 3 years. He paused, his voice catching. But my son did not stay silent. Mark saw what I failed to see. And now I understand. He turned to me, his voice softer now. Today, if you agree, I want to call you my daughter. Not just because Mark wanted that, but because I do too. I had never known that being called daughter could feel so heavy and yet so weightless, like laying down a burden and lifting something sacred in its place. I hugged him. For the first time. After that long, almost impossible embrace, I stepped down from the stage, my legs still trembling. The wooden box remained in my hands, like a treasure returned after years of being hidden away. I don't remember how I made it back to my seat, only that the looks cast my way had changed. No longer suspicious or wary, but something that felt almost like respect. Applause broke out after a few hesitant seconds. At first scattered, then louder, spreading across the entire room. I stood there unsure, should I stay standing or sit down? But Mr. Henry spoke up. Maybe it's time we change something in this family, he said, his voice now deeper. Not everyone is born into a family. But some people choose to stay even when no one opens the door. His words rang out like a bell. I didn't know who he was speaking to: Patricia, the extended relatives, or perhaps just to himself. But I knew it was the truth. Patricia was still standing. She hadn't left. Her gaze toward me no longer held contempt, but it wasn't warmth either. Perhaps it was a mixture of confusion and quiet humility. Then she stepped forward, her heels tapping steadily in the softened air. I didn't know Mark wrote a letter like that, she said, not looking at me but instead at Mr. Henry. Neither did I, he replied. Not until I opened it for the first time a few months ago. Patricia swallowed hard, her eyes meeting mine for the first time. I thought, you only came out of obligation. Out of duty. Not love. I didn't know what to say. The truth was, I had once wanted to walk away from it all: Mark's house, the familiar street with his favorite cafe, and this entire family. But every time I tried to leave, I saw pieces of Mark in every corner of the house, in Mr. Henry's habits, in the cracks on the porch where he once fixed a loose board for me one autumn afternoon. I came because it's what he would have done if he were still alive, I said. I'm just continuing something the man I loved didn't get to finish. I didn't say it for her. But it made her turn away. Mr. Henry stepped down from the stage now slowly but steadily. He motioned for the rest of the family to come closer. I've had the gift list ready for 3 months, he said. But there was one I always held back. Not because I forgot, but because I hadn't found the right moment. He opened the leather case he carried and pulled out a larger box, rectangular, made of oak, engraved with the initials. I froze. Those were my initials, Eliza Moore. Mark ordered this box before he passed, Mr. Henry continued. He once said, I want to give this to Eliza on our first anniversary. But if I can't, I hope you'll give it to her for me. I reached out to take the box, my heart trembling as though a winter wind had swept through it. Inside was a photo album, pictures of me and Mark from our early days, each numbered and hand-labeled in blue ink. The first was from our date by the river, where Mark awkwardly spilled a drink on my foot. The second was the day he proposed. I was covering my face, laughing while he sat beside me, blushing like a child. There were wedding photos, our first Christmas night, even one he secretly took while I was napping on the sofa with a book dropped at my feet. Beneath the album was a set of keys with a small note. For the lake house, the one you said you'd live in if the world got too loud. I don't remember when I started crying. This gift wasn't just a remembrance. It was proof I was never forgotten. That even though Mark was gone, his love still lived in every tiny detail. I've kept that house for 3 years, Mr. Henry said. Never told a soul. And I've done exactly what my son wished. Your name is now on the deed. I didn't know what to say. Not because I was surprised, but because deep down, I had never dared believe I was worthy of something this beautiful, after so many years of trying, enduring, and waiting in silence. Since that evening, everything seemed to break apart and rearrange itself. Some things fell away, while others finally returned to where they belonged. And then there were those pieces we thought had been lost, but strangely, they were still there, merely covered in the dust of silence. Mr. Henry and I saw each other more often. No longer were our meetings short Sunday afternoon visits or strained, "How are you, Dad?" phone calls. We sat together on the porch sipping tea. He told me stories of his youth, about Mark as a child, a boy who often spilled milk but always tried to clean it up without anyone knowing. Mark loved you more than he ever showed, he said one soft, sunlit afternoon. He wasn't good with words. Just like his father. He chuckled, then looked into the distance. Or maybe we all think we have more time. I didn't reply then. We simply sat in silence, listening to the wind rustling through the maple trees turning color. The first time I returned to the lake house, it felt frozen in time. I slid the key into the lock, opened the door, and was met with the scent of aged wood and cinnamon, the very scent I had once chosen for the little kitchen. The tea set still sat in the glass cabinet. Our wedding photo was on the mantel. Mark's favorite reading chair still leaned slightly toward the window where the morning light streamed in. I walked slowly through each room, as if tracing my own memories. The floor creaked beneath me, the curtains fluttered in the breeze, and there was that absolute silence that only forgotten homes carry. But now I knew it was no longer forgotten. It had been kept for someone who never got the chance to return. The following week, Mr. Henry invited me over for dinner. It was a simple meal. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and apple pie, Mark's favorite. Patricia had cooked. She didn't say much, just quietly laid out the dishes. When we sat down, Mr. Henry took a deep breath and pulled out a folder. "This is the last thing I want you to know," he said, sliding the papers toward me. "I've updated my will." I looked at him, surprised. "Not because I owe you anything. Not even because Mark asked me to. But because I want to correct something I did wrong." I opened the folder. In addition to the lake house now officially being mine, he had left me a share in his former company, not large, but enough for me to live comfortably. More importantly, he had written a clear line in the will. "Daughter by true affection and chosen family, not by blood, Eliza Moore." It was the first time in my life I had been called daughter in name in truth. Tears welled in my eyes. "You didn't have to do this, Dad," I whispered. "I don't need anything." "Mr. Henry placed his hand over mine. "I know. That's exactly why I know you deserve it." The day he went to the lawyer's office to sign, I went with him. He wore a gray suit, a deep blue tie, Mark's favorite color. Patricia didn't come, but before we left, she nodded quietly and said, "If that's what he wants, I won't stand in the way." After signing, he turned to me and smiled gently. "This is the first time I've done something not for anyone else but for myself." I held his hand tightly. "I'm proud of you, Dad." He smiled, his aging eyes glistening. Mark would be proud too. That night, I lay in the lake house with the windows open, letting the breeze and the scent of pine drift into my sleep. I placed Mark's letter on the nightstand. Every time I reread it, I could feel him as if he had never left. In the end, I understood the most important thing isn't being recognized by many, it's being seen, truly seen, by the one who had denied you the longest. Mr. Henry's recognition wasn't just a gift. It was an act of redemption, an unspoken apology, and a forgiveness I never thought I was still waiting for but received anyway. Once my heart had stopped holding blame. A week after Mr. Henry signed the new will, I received a call from his lawyer's office. "He left something else for you in a separate sealed envelope. He said it must be delivered by hand, never by post." The assistant's voice was gentle, but there was a seriousness to it that made my heart tighten. When I arrived, they handed me a small wooden box, the same kind that held Mark's letter, but this one had no name engraved on the surface. Just a handwritten note taped to the lid. "Only open when alone. Henry." I brought the box back to the lake house and placed it on the wooden kitchen table. The late afternoon sun streamed through the window, casting a soft golden glow over it, as if the box was waiting not urgently, not impatiently, but with quiet purpose. I sat down, took a deep breath, and opened the lid. Inside was a letter. And an old yellowed notebook. I recognized it instantly. It was the same notebook Mr. Henry used to carry when visiting Mark in the hospital during his treatment. I never thought he had kept it. I picked up the letter and unfolded it. The handwriting was neat and deliberate, with the cadence of a man who had lived through much, but there was something warmer about it now, more intimate than anything he had ever said to me aloud. "Eliza, if you're reading this, it means I finally found the courage to do what I should have done years ago. Apologize to you. I was once a stubborn, narrow-minded father, full of preconceptions. When Mark told me he was going to marry you, I objected, not because you weren't good enough, but because you weren't what I had imagined for his future. I was wrong. After Mark passed, instead of holding you close to share our grief, I pushed you further away. I thought that pain was mine alone to carry. But Mark wasn't just my son, he was your husband, your love, your other half. And I ignored that. For 3 years after he left, you still came. You didn't give up. You never complained. And I witnessed it all, every bouquet you left at his grave, every dish you brought to the house, every time you helped Patricia even when she remained distant. You persisted, as if something still mattered enough to stay. I didn't understand, not until one day I sat in a silent room with a cold cup of tea, and a silence so deep it took my breath. And I realized, you were the only one who had never truly left me, even when I had left you in silence. The notebook you're holding now contains all the things I never dared to say. The times I saw Mark smile when he spoke about you. The moments I wanted to call you daughter, but couldn't find the words. The things I wrote down, but never spoke aloud. Today, I give it to you as a piece of the past I believe you deserve to keep. Not because Mark wanted it, but because I believe that if one day you have a daughter of your own, you'll know how to love her in all the ways I failed to. For everything I can say now, though it's late. Thank you. And I'm sorry. Henry. I couldn't stop the tears. They fell onto the wooden table, onto the fragile notebook I held in trembling hands as I began to flip through the pages. Mr. Henry's handwriting appeared sometimes shaky, sometimes carefully corrected, as if he tried to get every word just right. Today Eliza brought me the soup Mark used to love. I didn't thank her. I should have. Eliza smiled at Patricia when she turned away. I saw, and I didn't understand why she still does it. I see Mark in Eliza's eyes every time she looks at an old photo. I didn't think I'd ever call her daughter. But today I did, and I felt something lift inside me. I pressed the notebook to my chest, as though within it were not just Henry's thoughts, but pieces of Mark left behind, unfinished love, unspoken words, silent protection carried across the years. The lake house, once a place I dreamed of sharing with Mark, had now become the space where I speak with memory and with myself. I was no longer an outsider, no longer the guest at the party, or the shadow behind a lost love. I was part of this family, seen, valued, and finally loved. That year autumn came early. The road leading to the lake house blazed with crimson leaves, and I found myself visiting more often. I no longer felt the place belonged only to a broken dream. It had begun to breathe with the present and a future I had never dared imagine. One afternoon, while tending the small garden behind the house, Mr. Henry called. His voice sounded slightly different, deeper, with a hint of hesitation. "Eliza, could you come by tonight? There are a few things I'd like to say in private." I agreed, and a strange feeling settled in my chest. Not anxiety, but something more like the anticipation of a truth waiting to be revealed. That evening I arrived. His house was the same, tidy, quiet, but something in the air had shifted. Patricia wasn't home. Mr. Henry was sitting in his familiar armchair, wearing a worn gray sweater, holding an unopened envelope. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Today I want to tell the truth. And you have the right to know." I sat silently, letting him begin. "There's something I've never told anyone, not even Patricia," he said. "About Mark's letter." I tilted my head slightly, heart sinking. "Didn't you receive it after his passing?" "No," he replied, eyes drifting off. "Mark gave it to me. In person. 3 months before the accident." For a moment it felt like my heart stopped. He knew something was going to happen? He shook his head. "No. But that day, the two of us had coffee and Mark said, 'If something happens to me, I want you to give this letter to Eliza.' I laughed, told him not to be ridiculous. But he was so serious it gave me chills. 'And you kept it for 3 years?' 'I couldn't give it to you,' he said softly, his eyes heavy with regret. 'I read it the same day Mark gave it to me. And I was furious. Furious he would write such things, as if handing you over to me. As if admitting you mattered more than blood.' I said nothing. His words pierced through the silent years I had endured like tiny sharp needles. 'I felt like I was being forced to accept you,' he continued, his voice trembling. 'And I wasn't ready.' 'But why now?' I asked, trying to steady my voice. 'Because I realized I was the one who deserved to be left behind. Not you.' He stood, walked over to a table and brought back a small box. Inside was an old set of keys and a pocket watch. 'I bought this for Mark's 30th birthday. But I never gave it to him.' I opened the watch. Inside the lid a line was engraved. 'To the one who taught me what true love means.' I engraved that after reading Mark's letter to you," he said. "Not because Mark was perfect, but because he saw what I couldn't. That love doesn't require blood. It only needs sincerity." It felt as if someone had taken all the air from the room. Silence. Emotion. Gratitude. Pain. It all intertwined. "I hid it for 3 years because I was afraid," he confessed. "Afraid that by giving it to you, I'd have to face everything I'd failed to do." I stepped forward and took his hand. "I forgive you. Not because you've changed, but because you chose to do the right thing even if late." He gently squeezed my hand. His aged eyes were brimming. A few weeks later, Mr. Henry's health began to decline. His heart condition, one he'd never spoken of, had worsened. I came every day to care for him. We reread the old notebook, drank tea together, sat in silence. Once he asked me, "If Mark were here, what do you think he'd be doing today?" I smiled through tears. "Probably sitting right here, fighting with you over the last cookie." He laughed, a sound mixed with a cough, but radiant nonetheless. "Then you'd better eat more." His share too. I began writing down my story. Not to complain, but to preserve it for myself, for future generations, for anyone who's ever stood outside a door that wouldn't open. Because sometimes the miracle isn't the door being opened. It's that someone inside finally learned how to step out. The day Mr. Henry was admitted to the hospital. I was the one who signed the paperwork, not Patricia. She didn't protest. She wasn't the same as before, not exactly warm, but no longer distant either. There was a quiet concession between us, a kind of peace after the storm. "I'm not someone who apologizes easily," she once said during an afternoon in the hospital waiting room, sitting across from me. "And I've never been good at loving people." I said nothing. "But I see the way he smiles when he talks about you," she continued. "It's a smile I haven't seen since Mark passed." I looked at her. The lines on her forehead, the eyes no longer sharp but softened, like someone who had finally understood something but no longer had the strength to fix it all. I only nodded slightly. In that moment I understood that sometimes real apologies don't come in words, they exist in quiet endurance, and in the moments we choose to let go. After a week of treatment, Mr. Henry returned home. The doctor said there wasn't much time left, and he chose to spend his final days in his old house. I moved in with him not because anyone asked but because I wanted to. Patricia went to stay with her sister in another state. Before she left, she placed an envelope in my hand. "I'm not your mother," she said. "But if I was married to the man Mark respected, then I think I should at least leave something decent behind. These are documents regarding assets Mark left behind that no one has touched. From now on, you should be the one to decide." I didn't open the envelope right away. I simply nodded and thanked her. The scars between us might never fully heal, but I didn't need them to disappear, I just needed them to stop hurting. The days spent with Mr. Henry felt like a journey backward through time. We didn't do much. Just sat on the porch, drank tea, listened to the falling leaves, and read old notes he had written about Mark, about me, about himself. I began journaling regularly. Sometimes letters to Mark, sometimes entries with no clear recipient, just a way to hold on to something. Emotions. Regrets. Slow, quiet joy. One morning Mr. Henry called me to his bedside. The sun had not fully risen, but a faint light had begun to filter through the curtains. "Eliza," he whispered, "I dreamt of Mark last night." I held his hand. "What did he say?" "He said, 'You've done it, Dad. Now it's your turn.'" He smiled, eyes still barely open. "I think maybe he's right." "You've done so well," I whispered back, voice catching. "Mark would be so proud." He gently squeezed my hand one last time. Mr. Henry's funeral wasn't large, but it was warm. I stood beside his photo, not crying. I only felt a lightness in my chest. Not because the pain was gone, but because I knew everything that needed to be said had been said. Everything that needed to be heard had been heard. There were no debts left between us. Lily, his granddaughter, was the first to hug me. "You're the only person he mentioned every single day during those last months," she said. "I think he saw you as the greatest legacy he left behind." I didn't know how to respond. I simply smiled and nodded. Some forms of love don't need a label because their presence is loud enough. A few weeks later, I returned to the lake house. Winter had arrived. The lake was partially frozen, trees bare but not desolate. In the biting cold wind, the house felt warmer than any home I'd ever known. I placed a new photo frame on the table. A picture of the three of us, me, Mr. Henry, and Mark, pieced together from separate photos but blended so naturally it looked like we had all been together. Beside it were Mr. Henry's notebook, Mark's letter, and the pocket watch which I now carried with me whenever I left the house. On New Year's Day, I invited a few people over. Not a party, just a quiet gathering. Lily came. Some of Mark's old friends showed up. There was soft music, the scent of cinnamon pastries, and laughter over mugs of hot cocoa. One of Mark's friends, Jacob, looked around and said, "This house, it's clearly being lived in, not just preserved." I smiled. Because it's held together by memories, not materials. At the end of the evening, I sat alone on the porch, wrapped in a thick scarf. The sky was full of stars. I looked up into the deep black sky, thinking of Mark, of Mr. Henry, of all the broken things that had slowly been mended. And I knew from that day forward I was no longer the outsider. I was the keeper of the flame. Spring arrived. The first breeze of the season carried the soft scent of jasmine into the small kitchen where I was making tea. Sunlight spread across the old wooden floor in golden streaks. I looked around the lake house, no longer just Mark in my home, but truly mine now. A living, warm place holding everything the past had left behind and everything the future might still offer. On the shelf, Mr. Henry's photo frame now had a small handwritten note beneath it. Your daughter, not by blood, but by love. One Saturday morning I received a parcel. No sender's name, just a cream-colored envelope left in the mailbox by the gate. I opened it. Inside was a simple card, the handwriting neat and precise. Eliza. I am Mr. Henry's private attorney. Before his passing, he left me an audio recording to be played for you on this very day, Mark's birthday. If you are ready, please give me a call. I will play the recording for you. Sincerely, Robert Mansfield. My hands trembled. It had been years since I'd celebrated Mark's birthday. I still remembered the date, still lit a single candle, still whispered happy birthday into the air. But I had never expected another gift beyond memory. I picked up the phone. About an hour later I sat in front of my computer, headphones on. And Mr. Henry's voice filled my ears, not the faint, breathless tone from his final days, but strong and steady, like the day he stood before the entire family and called me daughter. Eliza, if you're listening to this, then I am no longer here. But I wanted to leave you something that isn't property, isn't material, it's something simple. A choice. In the final box I left with my attorney there are two things. One is a letter from Mark that you've never read. The second is the decision to open the house in Vermont, the one I kept hidden from you and Mark, the place where Mark had quietly planned to build a small care center for people who have no family. He said that if, one day, you wanted to do something meaningful, you could bring that vision to life. All the paperwork is done. It's yours now. But what you do with it is entirely up to you. Whatever you decide, know that Mark would be smiling. I sat there stunned. Part of me wanted to cry. Part of me felt an unexpected warmth. In the darkness of loss, Mark and his father had left behind small flames enough to light the way forward, if I chose to follow them. The following week I drove to Vermont. It wasn't far, but I had never thought to return. A wide stretch of land sat in the valley, with a simple wooden house that had clearly aged. But standing on that ground I saw Mark in my imagination. He stood there, hands on his hips, nodding. See? This spot will catch morning sun. A cherry tree right there. The elderly will drink tea, look at the lake. No one will be left behind. I stood in the middle of the field and wept. Not out of sorrow, but because I knew I had just received the final gift. Not the house. Not the inheritance. But the opportunity to carry on love for someone who was no longer here. A few months later, a new sign stood at the entrance to the now restored wooden house. The Bennett House, where no one is forgotten. I chose Mr. Henry's surname not because of blood, but because he chose me, acknowledged me, and gave me something I will never forget. On opening day I invited Lily, some of Mark's old friends, even Patricia. She didn't say much. Just walked quietly around the house, rested her hand on the wooden wall, and finally whispered, "He would be proud." I smiled. I know. That night, I sat in the small room facing the lake, writing in my journal. Mark, you're gone, but you left me a path. Henry made mistakes, but he chose to make it right. And me, I chose to live. Not just survive. I will carry on what you started. Not out of duty, but because of love. And I know somewhere you're smiling. Eliza. I closed the journal, poured another cup of hot tea, and looked at the moonlight shimmering across the still surface of the lake. There was no loneliness anymore. Only peace, the kind that comes when you've been seen, been loved, and are finally ready to begin a new chapter. Not just for yourself, but for those who still need a home, a hand, a chance.